So, James, Trump notoriously ran on a anti-war platform.
He did.
And since he's came to power, we've seen a lot of foreign conflicts and US interventions.
Yep.
Most notably, their intervention in Iran. Mm-hmm. And now something has happened in Venezuela, has it not?
It hasn't happened yet, Jordie. I think we are on the verge of something happening.
Okay.
So the United States has sent a naval force to the Southern Caribbean. They are doing this on the... It's just a hilarious topic on the pretext of cracking down on narco-terrorism.
Yeah.
This is kind of a new designation that they've pulled out of the woodworks. So they essentially, no one buys freedom and democracy anymore.
Yes.
So you can't say we're going to Iraq to bring freedom and democracy because that's a load of... It's just not correct. Everyone knows that. So you have to bring it in as a security issue. We're being directly threatened by this new abstract thing. So they've got the war on drugs and the war on terror, and they have combined them into one.
They passed a law, I believe, just last year, was it? Where they were able to designate the cartels as terrorist organisations.
Correct. That is absolutely true. So they've created an even bigger monster.
Yep.
And this gives them plenty of pretext to go overseas and to slay said monster. So, in particular, what we're talking about now, they have sent a naval force of over 8 vessels to the Southern Caribbean. So this includes an amphibious assault vessel, 3 destroyers, 4,500 military personnel, F-35 fighter jets, and a nuclear-capable submarine. This is essentially targeting the head of the Venezuelan government, Nicolas Maduro.
Yep.
So, according to the US government, he's not the head of an independent nation of Venezuela, but he's the head of a bloodthirsty transnational drug cartel known as the Cartel de los Soles, which translates to English as the Suns Cartel.
Yep.
Some US sources are even claiming that he is behind the notorious Venezuelan cartel criminal group, the Tren de Aragua. And even the Mexican Sinaloa cartel.
Wow.
So pretty soon they're going to start saying he was the founder of ISIS, I'd imagine. I'm pretty sure he was behind those rallies in Australia last weekend.
Yeah, seems rational.
He's omnipresent.
That's quite the accusation.
It is, Jordie. This designation has led to an increase in the bounty placed on his head by the US State Department to $50 million.
James?
Jordie.
When the current leader of Syria,
yes,
Mohammed al-Julani,
yes,
when he was the leader of ISIS or
yes,
Al-Qaeda in Syria, there was a $1 million bounty on his head. 10 million. 10 million. And this is 50 million now for Nicolas Maduro. Is he 5 times as dangerous as Mohammed al-Julani?
Apparently so, Jordie. Or maybe they're 5 times more likely to get rid of him, which, given the fact that Julani is now the president of Syria, making deals with American businesses, speaks a lot about the true intentions. So I just wanted to play this. This is the announcement.
Today, the Department of Justice and State Department are announcing a historic $50 million reward for information leading to the arrest of Nicolas Maduro. To date, the DEA has seized 30 tons of cocaine linked to Maduro and his associates, with nearly 7 tons linked to Maduro himself. Under President Trump's leadership, Maduro will not escape justice, and he will be held accountable for his despicable crimes.
7 tons of cocaine linked to Nicolas Maduro.
Maduro himself, he actually, he grew the coca leaves and he was out there stamping them all down, dude.
It's a lot of cocaine.
Yeah, and look, if anyone in our audience does know Nicolas Maduro, he's quite a bombastic figure. I find him personally quite charming.
Yeah.
But this is his response, and I actually don't think anyone else in the world could respond like this. So this is his direct response to the bounty.
Venga por mí. Aquí lo espero en Miraflores. No hace tarde en llegar, cobarde. Venga por mí, cobarde.
He's very passionate about this.
Yes.
I believe the rough translation of what he was saying, he's saying, I'll be waiting for you here in Miraflores, which is the palace in Caracas. So pretty much come and get me, you cowards. Now, I actually think that's a pretty strong and commendable thing to say.
Yes, especially when you have the US empire targeting you.
Yeah, like when you're staring down the barrel of a of a US naval strike group, essentially. And so this has been progressing over the course of the last probably about 2 weeks or so.
Yep.
Obviously, we've had this pressure of the US naval build-up. And then recently, Jordie, this is on Tuesday morning, this is what happened. This is from, I believe, CBS News in the US.
Tonight, the White House releasing this dramatic video of the U.S. blowing up a boat in the Southern Caribbean. President Trump says it was carrying drugs from Venezuela and that the strike killed 11 members of the notorious gang Tren de Aragua, or TDA.
We have a lot of drugs pouring into our country, coming in for a long time. And these came out of Venezuela. We took it out.
Last month, the Pentagon deployed 3 guided missile destroyers to international waters near Venezuela after President Trump designated several drug cartels, as well as TDA, foreign terrorist organizations. The U.S. did pull off a large-scale prisoner swap with Venezuela this summer. Now tensions with Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro are rapidly escalating.
The Maduro regime is not the legitimate government of Venezuela. It is a narco-terror cartel.
Tonight, the president saying no U.S. forces were hurt in the strike. Maduro has claimed that the U.S. military buildup in the Caribbean is aimed at overthrowing his government, and he's deployed troops along his borders. Tonight, a senior White House official is downplaying any possibility of the U.S. invading Venezuela, but says the president will use any means necessary to tackle drug cartels.
James, they have very strong accusations labelling the government of Venezuela as a narco-terror organisation.
Yes, and then using that as pretext to blow up a boat in international waters. I think this is the kind of thing where they can get this footage, the military footage, most likely from a helicopter or a drone, which depicts that quite a small-looking boat with supposedly 11 people in it, also carrying drugs. So apparently what had happened is that boat had left the Venezuelan coast and was heading towards Trinidad and Tobago. Yep. And once it had left Venezuelan sovereign waters, that's when it was struck in international waters by wherever that was a drone or a helicopter. What I think is interesting is they have been yet to provide any evidence that these people, I'm not saying they weren't, criminals or something, but I'm saying there's been no evidence that they were trafficking drugs. I couldn't count 11 people in that boat. I think if you had a boat that small, you'd not have, and you had 11 people in it, that doesn't leave a lot of room in said boat for drugs. Yeah. I think this is essentially, my interpretation is regardless of what was on that boat or what wasn't on that boat, they're getting a nice little PR win for at home.
And you took the words out my mouth.
It's just like bombing the Iranian nuclear facility. We completely obliterated it. Look at all this hard work we're doing. However, they've replaced Iranian civilian nuclear weapons program with scary brown drug traffickers.
It's really good optics. And it's nicely packaged for American corporate television so that people can see it at home.
Of course. So what has happened in response, I believe about 2 days ago, is the Department of Defense and the Pentagon claimed that 2 Venezuelan fighter jets flew over and were flying close to this US naval force, to which they said, if any of these Venezuelan planes get any closer, we will shoot them down, and we will not, we see this as a threat to us, we will not be intimidated. Again, really twisted logic when you are amassing a naval force off the coast of another nation. To me, I'm getting whiffs of the Gulf of Tonkin, which was the incident that kickstarted the Vietnam War, where the United States essentially had a naval force essentially threatening and intimidating the North Vietnamese, and they didn't actually come under any direct attack from the North Vietnamese, but they claimed they did, and that was their excuse for directly launching the Vietnam War, as we know it.
Right. A very classic false flag attack.
Yeah, classic. Now, whether that's happening or not, time will tell. However, there are a few things that I can be quite certain of. I've done a little bit of research about this.
James, before you get into this, you did say one thing, and it reminded me. You said the Department of Defense.
Yes.
Oh. And have they not now, has Trump not come out now and renamed the Department of Defense?
Yes, he has, Jordie. Thank you for reminding me. It is now called the Department of War.
Yes.
Which I actually think this is the best thing he has done.
Correct. And Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, is now the Secretary for War.
fantastic.
Yeah.
No, I think this is really good because
This isn't a joke, by the way. This actually has happened.
This actually has happened, but thank you for saying that. And I've actually always advocated for this because we just need to put it out on the table. We're not defending anyone.
Yeah.
I think Australia should do the same.
Yeah.
The Australian war forces, the Israeli war forces, we're not defending.
If you're defending your own country, you're a defence force.
Yeah.
If you're projecting imperial power abroad,
of course,
you are not a defence force.
I completely agree. And I think it's good that I actually genuinely do think I'm glad that he's done that, not ironically. So, look, I'm going to break down, I've got some facts and some statistics here, and I'm going to break down why all these claims are, provably incorrect. So, firstly, the Cartel de los Soles. I'm quite a avid reader and researcher on the narco cartels, specifically in Mexico and also in South America. It's what I find a very interesting kind of area of study in history, and that kind of intersection between kind of geopolitics, domestic politics and criminal activity. Yes. That's something I'm very interested in. I've never heard of this cartel before, Jordie.
And this is the cartel that they've accused Nicolas Maduro of leading?
Yeah, apparently Nicolas Maduro is the head of this cartel.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do, I went over the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, and they had an annual 2025 drug report. So I'm going to be referencing that quite a bit throughout this segment. Looking at some of the information they provide and some of the statistics. I'm also going to reference a fantastic article written by a gentleman by the name of Pino Arlacchi. So he was an Italian gentleman. He was, I believe, an Italian politician. He was the ex-Director General of the UN office at Vienna and the Executive Director of the UN Drug Control Program, which later became the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. So he wrote a fantastic article in, I believe it was Venanalysis, in which he outlines some of these points, and I'm going to be quoting him a little bit here. So this is quoting him. He says, "The Cartel de los Soles is a product of Trump's imagination. It is allegedly led by the president of Venezuela. However, it is not mentioned in the report from the world's leading anti-drug agency or any other anti-crime agency, whether European or otherwise. Not even a footnote. The deafening silence should make anyone with a shred of critical sense reflect. How can an organised crime group powerful enough to warrant a $50 million bounty be completely ignored by all agencies involved in anti-drug efforts? In other words, what is marketed as a super cartel worthy of a Netflix show is actually a collection of small local networks, the kind of petty crime found in any country, including the United States, where nearly 100,000 people die each year from opioid overdoses, unrelated to Venezuela, but all to do with American Big Pharma." So I think that's a very enlightening quote there, because he is an expert on drugs, cartels, monitoring, research, implementation on a global level, and this is his conclusion that he's coming to. So it wasn't just me being, a casual, interested observer. It was someone far more qualified than me saying, hey, no, this actually doesn't exist. Yeah. No one's heard of this cartel before. So I went onto the United Nations website, Jordie, and I downloaded their official 2025 drug report, drugs and crime report, and they provided us with this really handy little map, which I'll pull up here. So the primary producers of cocaine are Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. And as we can see here, these are all the main kind of transit points. As we can pretty clearly see, there is a small amount of cocaine trafficking going through Venezuela, but there is not a great deal. Most of it is it's either leaving Ecuador or it's going up through Panama and then through Central America to Mexico. Before it enters the United States. So I wanted to talk, Jordie, about the nation of Ecuador, and I'll bring us back to the topic at hand.
Well, James, this does remind me of a segment you did called Cocaine and Bananas.
Yes. If any hardcore Left Hook fans are out here, we did an episode in May this year entitled The Wildest Election That You Didn't Hear About, where we went in depth about the election of Ecuador's new president, Daniel Noboa. Now, Daniel Noboa is the heir to the Noboa fortune. He is, I believe, the richest or one of the richest men in Ecuador. Yes. His family are banana barons. So they own the entire banana supply chain from like plantation, production, distribution. Their bananas go all over the world. They also have interests in finance. So I believe they are associated and have a controlling stake in many of Ecuador's banks. So Daniel Noboa won the election under statistically improbable circumstances, shall we say, under the protection of US arch-mercenary deep state ghoul Eric Prince, right? And funnily enough, in Europe, Jordie, lots of the time they'll get a Noboa trading banana container will come into a port in like Barcelona or Croatia or Belgium or something like that, and they'll open up the container and it'll be full of cocaine. Who would have guessed it?
Coincidence?
Coincidence. Well, I did think it was a coincidence, Jordie. But it turns out as much as 57% of the cocaine of the containers leaving Ecuador are filled with cocaine. And again, being intertwined with the Ecuadorian financial sector, he launders all this money through the banks that he also owns. So a bit suspicious, but we do not see Ecuador being targeted with a US naval blockade,
definitely not.
even though we have direct, concrete evidence of this. What's more, the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, he's affectionately known by the man Nicolas Maduro himself as Narco Rubio. When he was a young man living in Florida, his brother-in-law, who he shared a house with, was one of Miami's biggest cocaine traffickers back in the 80s, back in the cocaine cowboys days. So it's really funny how these things work out. So it's almost as if you're a drug trafficker or associated with drug traffickers, you're going to get preferential treatment from the United States. If you crack down on drug traffickers, then you are the enemy. Now, I'm not saying this because I have any direct evidence, but it's just that's what I can logically infer from the information at hand. So, during, again, I'm going to keep quoting Senor Pino Arlachi here. During my time at the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, one of the most important lessons I learned was that geography does not lie. Drug routes follow a clear logic based on proximity to production centres, ease of transport, the corruption of local authorities, and the presence of established criminal networks. Venezuela fails to meet almost all of these criteria. Colombia produces over 70% of the world's cocaine. Peru and Bolivia cover most of the remaining 30%. The most logical routes for reaching the American and European markets via the Pacific to Asia, through the Eastern Caribbean towards Europe, and overland through Central America towards the United States. Geographically, Venezuela is disadvantaged for all three main routes as it borders the South Atlantic. Criminal logistics means that Venezuela plays only a marginal role in the grand theatre of international narco-trafficking. During my time as head of the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, I frequently travelled to Colombia, Bolivia, Peru and Brazil, but never to Venezuela. There was simply no need. So I think we can infer that this pretense that the United States is conjuring up to say, hey, we need to, have a military intervention against Venezuela based on X and Y, they're drug traffickers. Yes. Do you think we can kind of safely assert that that is incorrect?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, good.
It's completely political.
It is completely political, Jordie. So that leads us to the question, why are they doing this?
Yes.
I think there's a few factors at play.
Yeah, well, notoriously, in the previous Trump administration, they targeted Venezuela with heavy sanctions.
Yes.
Tried to topple the government on a number of times, and that was spearheaded by John Bolton at the time.
Mm-hmm. Correct. It was, and that was an operation that was notoriously called the Bay of Piglets.
Yes.
Named after the failed Cuban Bay of Pigs invasion. So the first one failed, so let's name the second one after it, and who would have guessed it also failed?
Yeah.
There was also an incident where Nicolas Maduro was doing a speech to the public and a drone exploded nearby. There's an interview with him with Max Blumenthal from the Grey Zone, where he actually discusses that assassination attempt.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's safe to say that the Republican Party specifically has been trying to target Nicolas Maduro and topple his government for the better part of a decade now.
Yeah, look, I'd say arguably going back to when Hugo Chavez took power.
Yes.
I'd say that was the tipping point.
Yeah.
So I think the most obvious reason, or the most straightforward reason, is resources. As it always comes down to hydrocarbons, specifically oil. Venezuela is they have the largest proven oil reserves in the world. So most estimates place it at approximately 303 billion barrels. Saudi Arabia is second with 267 billion. Iran has 208, and Canada has 163 billion barrels, that is. So I hate to keep quoting from Pino Alachi, but this man hits the nail on the head every time. He says, and he's referencing here the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime Report. This document merely confirms the findings of the previous 30 annual reports, which did not address Venezuelan drug trafficking because it does not exist. Only 5% of Colombian drugs transit through Venezuela. For context, in 2018, whilst 210 tonnes of cocaine passed through Venezuela, Colombia produced or traded as much as 2,370 tonnes, 10 times more. And Guatemala produced or traded 1,400 tonnes. Yes, you read that right. Guatemala is a drug corridor 7 times more important than the Bolivarian narco-state allegedly is. However, no one talks about this because Guatemala has historically accounted for only a tiny share of the global total, 0.01% of the one drug that interests Trump. Oil. Bit of tongue-in-cheek analysis there.
Put it very well.
He did put it very well. But so they have a lot of oil.
Yeah.
And
they have somewhat government control or government ownership and sovereignty of the oil, do they not?
Yes, of the oil industry.
Yes.
That is correct.
And that upsets corporate America.
That burns corporate America so hard. They cannot handle that. One of the issues with the Venezuelan economy is it always has been a petrostate. That's always been the primary export and the primary... it's what has primarily brought revenues into the country. And that leads to many problems. Obviously, with all economies, we've seen how the Gulf states in the Middle East have started to try and diversify their economies. So what happened is, after Chavez came into power, the government focused on restructuring the state-owned oil companies, so they're relying less on raw exports and more on economic diversification and social projects at home. So that does take quite a long time. That's a long process to try and kind of restructure your economy in such a way. So when Trump came in Trump 1, from 2016 to 2020, they really started going hard after Venezuela. Yeah. They put these sanctions on the Venezuelan economy, which almost suffocated the economy. So their economy contracted by over 95%. Insane.
And led to mass immigration from Venezuela into the US.
And you know what the best part that no one talks about, Jordie, is that at the beginning, the Americans were encouraging Venezuelans to leave.
Yeah.
Because you did have, I think it's a population of between 30 to 40 million people. And you know, in the urban centres, lots of educated people, cultured people. Venezuela has been around for a very long time. So they were saying, come, leave Venezuela, come to the US, and that will hurt Venezuela more.
Correct. And you need a workforce to be able to grow your economy. And if people are leaving, then your workforce is leaving the country.
Of course, that is entirely true. However, I do find it funny that that's one of the primary creators of the so-called migrant crisis, which has completely just galvanised US politics. And now the policy is being completely reversed. Yeah. However, in the last couple of years, their economy has stabilised and it is starting to grow. It's no longer in complete disarray. They're starting to bring people back in and they're starting to not be just such an absolute basket case. So this is why I think it does explain the timing of why this is happening now. I think the US imperial planners like Marco Rubio, I think that they know that the longer this goes, Venezuela's already under maximum pressure. They can't sanction them anymore.
Yeah.
Short of creating a reason to militarily strike Venezuela, narco-terrorism, they can't do anything else. So the longer they wait, the harder it's going to be.
And then they're in danger of Venezuela stabilizing, as you said.
God forbid you have a stable nation on your continent that isn't you. And that, I think, adds a lot.
Doesn't align with US policy.
Yeah, and I think that explains a lot of American policy in the Western Hemisphere. And everyone else has to be either subservient to us or an absolute basket case. Yeah. I also think one thing that's funny is this is a theory that I've been toying with. Marco Rubio is an insane neocon.
Yeah.
Obviously, as we've talked about him quite a bit on the pod before. But what's happened over the last kind of week and a half is Donald Trump has been out of action. So no one really knows what's happened.
He's getting old.
He's an old man. Yeah. And he's not a healthy man, dude. He's nothing but Diet Coke and Macca's, man.
Like Fox News.
And Fox,
that's not good for you.
It's not good for you. Like, he doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke, but like, I think the diet of Fox News, McDonald's, and Diet Coke collectively is worse than drinking and smoking.
I'd agree.
Yeah, but however, he's been away, so he hasn't been. I think it was about over a week where he just wasn't at press conferences, briefings, didn't make any appearances. My theory is that there is a shadow war going on between Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Vice President J.D. Vance, with both of them vying for the position of power once Donald Trump dies, which I think he will die in office. There's no way this man just retires gracefully. You know, he's going to just cark at one night.
That would be a way to go out.
It would, man.
You think about it, gets elected after almost being assassinated and then dies at the end of his office.
I can imagine him making some really insane statement like that migrants are eating the dogs, and then just dies on camera. It's such a fitting ending for that man. But I think what's happening is you have the more sober kind of bit more isolationist people like J.D. Vance, and they're vying for control with the insane fundamentalist neocon extremists like Marco Rubio. And I think this is the kind of thing here that Marco Rubio has wanted to do for a long time.
Yeah.
He has focused very much on the Western Hemisphere, attacks on Cuba, rhetorical attacks on all the other, Mexico, all the other Latin American nations as well. I think this is my interpretation, might be completely wrong, but I think this is his little baby that he's been nurturing.
Yeah.
And he's taken the opportunity to prove himself to the deep state neocon demons that run American foreign policy to say, hey, this is what's going to happen if I'm in charge. Back me, essentially.
That's a good theory.
So, however, we do have the material reasons, like the oil. However, Venezuela is actually has long identified itself as one of the birthplaces of Latin American independence and anti-imperialism. It is the birthplace of Simón Bolívar in Caracas in 1783. So he was the highborn son of an influential plantation-owning family, one of the richest families in Venezuela at the time, when it was still a Spanish possession. And he ended up leading armies of independence and defeating the Spanish and essentially founding the modern nations of Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. There might be one or two more that I'm missing out. He was an incredible man. We don't hear about him very much in Australia, obviously. But yeah, he also left an incredible legacy. So when Hugo Chavez came to power, he embraced this as part of their national identity, hence why they are known as the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and why they are carrying out what they call the Bolivarian Revolution. So part of his national identity was asserting independence for the region, the country, and his people. And then he started using the nation's vast oil and mineral wealth to develop society for the majority of Venezuelans to remain impoverished. So that was his main crime. So despite his death in the face of economic warfare, CIA-backed coup attempts at infiltration, and attempts at isolating the nation from the global system, Venezuela has still managed to remain independent and unbowed. And it's part of the axis of anti-imperialist nations that we have in Latin America.
Or as John Bolton refers to it, the troika of tyranny.
Troika of tyranny, correct. So that's the really scary nations like little Cuba, little Nicaragua and Venezuela, until recently Bolivia, but they've just, the left side of their political spectrum has lost the most recent election. So, look, Maduro isn't necessarily, I think, like all things that happen, when you have economic hardship, people are disenfranchised with their government. And contrary to popular belief, Maduro isn't a dictator. He doesn't control all the media. So there's plenty of right-wing Venezuelans in Venezuela who are part of the wealthy kind of elite who have been there forever from the plantation days,
yes,
who are perfectly happy to see Maduro lose power. However, he still managed to maintain his electoral majority. So what's happened is now that he's actually harnessed this act of aggression by the United States against him to increase his popularity, because now ordinary Venezuelans are going, hey, so I didn't necessarily like this man, but if he's standing up to the imperialist aggressors of the United States, then of course we're going to stand behind him.
Yeah.
So we saw on that clip I played earlier, all those people marching in time. They were some of the national militias. So in true kind of leftist fashion, they have a national militia force of currently over 4.5 million non-military personnel in their national militias, as well as the Venezuelan military, which has been mobilized. So I think Maduro has realized that in order to combat imperialist aggression, you have to have a well-educated, politically astute and armed working class and peasantry.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the main reasons why none of these last 2.5 decades of subversion have worked, Jordie, because the population is educated enough to know the political realities of what is going on. Before we finish, I just wanted to play a quick clip here of Nicolas Maduro speaking in Venezuela about the situation that is at hand. It is in Spanish with subtitles, so I will narrate. 8 military ships with 1,200 missiles and a nuclear submarine are targeting Venezuela. This is an extravagant, unjustifiable, immoral, and absolutely criminal, bloody threat. Absolutely criminal. They have wanted to escalate what they call maximum pressure, which in this case is military. And in response to maximum military pressure, we have declared maximum preparedness for the defense of Venezuela. Mr. President Donald Trump, you must be careful, because Marco Rubio wants to stain your hands with blood. South American, Caribbean, Venezuelan blood. They want to drag you into a bloodbath to tarnish the Trump name forever. With a massacre against the Venezuelan people, with a terrible war across South America and the Caribbean, this would be a full-scale continental war. They want to stain Donald Trump's hands with blood. So that was Maduro. Quite a strong choice of words.
Yeah, for sure.
And select choice of words. But I think what he's trying to do there is actually personally appeal to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So he's saying, Trump, I know you're reasonable, but these people around you are not reasonable. Do not let Marco Rubio, quoting him, stain your hands with blood.
Yeah.
I also think he is completely correct in that, look, I think we're not in the 1840s anymore. I think that if the United States actually has full-scale military intervention against a nation in Latin America, I think the effects of that will be beyond catastrophic. It will destabilise the entire continent. You think they're worried about migrant flows now? What's going to happen when they've destroyed a functioning nation state? And the chaos will spread. It won't just be Venezuela. It will be the entire continent. So I'm seeing a few similarities with the lead up to the Iraq War here.
Yeah, for sure.
Jordie.
Yeah.
So we've got these absolutely ridiculous, bogus pretenses. We've had a nation that has been under sanctions and demonised for so long, the public at home knows nothing about what's actually happening. You've got, he almost looks a bit like Saddam Hussein. Yeah. They both have moustaches. But also it's the risk of once you open this box, you cannot close it. Whatever happens after this, you cannot undo it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very dangerous time.
For sure.
I think that the United States going to Venezuela would have the same results as going into Iraq.
Yeah.
In that you will never succeed. it would cause massive chaos, a massive amount of deaths, and it would never be the same again. So, Jordie, I think we have to hope that maybe this is just for kind of intimidation. Maybe they're just going to try to do like a decapitation strike.
Yeah.
Even that would be chaotic, but I do think the Venezuelan state is strong enough to keep standing without Maduro. Regardless, though, this is a blatant act of aggression against a sovereign nation under completely provably false circumstances.
Yeah, James, and I guess only time will tell, really. We'll have to just keep monitoring over the next few weeks and see what happens.
We will, mate.
Thanks for that report. Absolutely wonderful.
No worries. And we will be covering all this fantastic, juicy content here on Left Hook Media. Like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you all next time.
See you later.
And we love you all. Thank you.